My name is Irwin Preet Singh, and today is June 8th, um, 2015, 14. I was 20 years old then. In July of 1984, I would be 20 years old. I was studying engineering in Faridabad, Haryana, and I was in a program where I had to work for a year as part of my curriculum. So I was working in a company on a GT road. It was located between Delhi and Faridabad in the middle of two, so I had to commute every day. And during that time, I was in Faridabad. There were a few things. At that time, my Nanaji, who was in Amritsar, and he was planning a trip to United States as well. And we knew all the entire Punjab was closed pretty much. And my Mamaji drove him off up to Ambala because entire Punjab was closed down. And interestingly, he flew to Chicago at that time, and we couldn't locate my Mamaji, who was held up by police and was not allowed to go back to Amritsar. And we were kind of for several days looking, where is he? And because there was no communication at all, that was one thing that I remember very well. And then, of course, in Delhi or Haryana and Faridabad, where I was living, in news media, it was one-sided story, and some of the censored articles in Tribune or Hindustan Times, I believe I remember they were censored heavily, and I could remember that, there were a lot of articles and pictures in the media after the fact, after the attack of 1984. Only kind of slowly the real magnitude of that incident became apparent only slowly after the state was slowly opened up. But immediately it was very restrictive, and you could only guess what was going on. It was mostly the government story or government's viewpoint that they're militants and they are trying to flush out the militants, and it was not apparent at that time that multiple gurdwaras were being attacked, but only the focus was on as if only Harmandir Sahib is the focus of Operation Blue Star, and the tagline in the media was that they were trying to flush some militants, and it wasn't apparent that innocent pilgrims were also who were innocently killed was only apparent afterwards. But during that time, things like, for 3 days, government was announcing over the speakers that anybody who wants to leave, or they can leave. Since I was not immediately in Amritsar in June of 1984, I believe that's your question related to June or November of 1984. In June, I was, we outside of Punjab. There wasn't really a whole lot of immediate effect. But my father was in Amritsar, and our house is like stone's throw away from Harmandir Sahib, and he kind of witnessed a few of the things he could from the rooftop, but not really exposing himself. But there were some bullet holes in our top floor that, because of the shooting going on in Harmandir Sahib, many random shots went all over in the city, and even my uncle's factory, it's on GT Road, like I would say about 3 miles away from Harmandir Sahib. it even had bullet holes kind of from random shots flying away from her madrasa. Um, so so it wasn't a direct impact on me personally, but some of my immediate relatives, they were impacted. I distinctly remember, as I said earlier, I was working in Taylor Instruments company. It would be in Haryana, and I was returning. I mean, in the morning we kind of heard some news that Indira Gandhi had been shot by her bodyguards, and by the time I was returning home, it was apparent that she had been killed at that time, and so I was just commuting back from my work to home, and there was some trickling of news that there have been violent incidents happening near the hospital in Delhi, but on GT Road and most of the route back to my home there was tension, but not any physical violence going on at that time. Perhaps it happened the next day, but that, and I was fortunate. And then it was clamped down, and there was curfew, and so we were not able to go out for a few days, even in Haryana. Yeah, my father, who was traveling at that time, again in Haryana, he was not locatable for several days. He was in Gurgaon, and with lack of communication and no means to communicate with him at that time, he was we couldn't get in touch with him, so we didn't know for several days if he was okay or not. And when he returned, actually during that time, we had a worker in our factory, a Hindu worker, who was quite loyal, and we actually sent him to find how he was doing, knowing his last whereabouts. So he kind of went and came back, and he brought the good news that he's fine. But during that time, he had to cut his hair to be able to just make through that time in Gurgaon. So that was that was one incident that immediately affected our family. I mean, it's flashbacks. Like, I remember quite a few things, and it's good that this project is documenting it, because there are bits of pieces, I believe, that I may have and some other people may have, but then collectively it can shed light into one important aspect, which I alone may not have the understanding of the entire magnitude. For example, I would commute in Delhi area after November when things had calmed down, but I most frequently traveled on GT Road and South Delhi, and all the vehicles that got burned in Delhi, I don't know how many junkyards were there, but I would pass this particular one, and I couldn't even imagine how big that whole junkyard was, which had all the trucks, all the cars that had been burnt down in the entire Delhi or vicinity. And I don't think it was the only place those vehicles were burned and brought up for scrap, but just that's one place where you could gauge the magnitude of of the suffering, not only material, but there were people driving those vehicles. How many survived? How many did not? I don't know. And so that kind of is one incident or piece of memory that is very vivid. And then also I remember in Faridabad we used to live in an industrial area, and it's all factories, very little residents, and there were a couple of sick truck drivers who had come to unload their load of wheat factory next door, and the factory where they were supposed to unload wouldn't give them shelter or anything, and if they had traveled at that time, they would surely would have been killed. Um, so so they stayed with us. They parked their truck in our kind of factory area. It's a house, and we had a residence upstairs, so we had good amount of room to have the truck brought in. So they parked the truck kind of outside the view of general kind so the truck couldn't be viewed from the road, and they stayed for several days during that time of November 1984, and it was in a good way. So at least I feel glad that in a way we could make a minor difference to help a family in that need, and that's kind of one of the positive memories. And then where I was working in Taylor Instruments in Haryana, there were a lot of Sikh colleagues, and some of them barely survived with clothes on their back, and all of their belongings were destroyed. So they managed to survive somehow while hiding in their neighbors' houses and all that. But I was glad to be able to see them again. And some of the other pieces of memory that that kind of shed light on human responses, which was clearly a very great divide between the Sikhs and everybody else who was not, and the attitude of even my professors, my fellow friends, I would consider. I can't even tell. I saw them afterwards in a different light, just because we couldn't see an eye to eye at that time. So I kind of remember that I felt that they could never be at the same level of friendship or respect since that incident. So those yeah. It impacted, and I think it was a matter of growth over the years, whereas you would see yourself as a persecuted subgroup and as a minority, and then I think the growth over years has been that there's a better response to I would say that you can prevent things like that just by being more prepared, in the sense that anything that can happen will happen. So the Sikhs who were kind of living in I would say in a bubble and never expected something like this to befall upon them kind of brings your thought to a reality that you never know when something like this can happen. It doesn't matter how calm or peaceful things might be, but this can happen anywhere, and the only preparation you can have before that is to be integral part of the society, so that you are a valuable member, and you have enough contacts, just not within the community but outside, that it doesn't become that easy to be persecuted by any majority, because Sikhs are relative minority anywhere in the world, and so we need to double our efforts, I believe, to be more I would say integrated as part of the broader human fabric, and that's, I think, if people see you more visibly in actual daily life, then I think things like this can be less disappointed or have a lesser impact. Incidents like these. Yeah, and it's hard to process some. My message. Even today, we are celebrating 30 years after that. Uh, what happened 30 years ago, and I'm still processing. What is that? We are still seeking for justice. So, what will justice look like today? So, let's say if magically you could wave a wand, what would make us as a community happy? And I'm not sure what that answer is. So, I'm still processing that. And so, even though we feel we've been deprived of, we haven't been given justice, so, but what would that look like if, that justice could be suddenly provided to us? And then also, how can we have a better messaging? How do people view? We still protest in front of, let's say, United Nations or embassies, but what exactly? I mean, there's a section of the community that wouldn't settle anything less than a homeland. But I also know that majority of the population may not be aligned with that goal. So, within the leadership, within the community, I don't think we have been able to articulate what is that we want as a community, and that's something I kind of still grapple with. So, I think.